kind of random.
What up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Hip Hop Now Podcast Reviews. I am your host, Vegas, of Hip Hop Now Podcast. Available wherever you listen to podcasts. All you got to do is go to your favorite podcast app. Type in the search column, Hip Hop Now Podcast. Subscribe and stay locked into weekly hip hop content. Don't be afraid. Don't be alarmed. Yes, the weekly podcast, Hip Hop Now Podcast, will return next week. Been a little busy, but I had to make sure that I fulfill my obligations, right? As a part of the hip hop establishment, right? By providing you with some content. Big shout out to the producers of this podcast over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. They make it all happen. They have decision-making privileges on this podcast, and they've brought you this podcast and this quality and all that good stuff. So the link is in the description if you would like to also become a producer of this podcast. Now, here we are. AZ has finally released Do or Die 2, ahead of Supreme Clientele 2, ahead of Muddy Waters 2, ahead of probably some other 2 or some other sequel that's supposed to come out. Now, the general thinking for a lot of hip-hop fans is split when someone makes a sequel to a classic album or a highly regarded album. I'm not being controversial here. I'm saying I don't think Do or Die 1 is a classic. I think some people say that because it's a time of their life. Like for me, that Do or Die came out when I was in college, and when I listen to that album, man, I get all the nostalgia feels. But back in 95, I wasn't thinking classic. 96, 97, 98, 99, 2008, whatever you want to say, right? I wasn't thinking classic because I felt like there were some songs that were extremely strong, and most of them featured Nas, right? And there were some dope records from AZ, but I felt like it didn't live up to my expectations after hearing his verse on Life's a Bitch, let alone that being one of the greatest verses of all time. But I never felt like Do or Die was a classic. But it is, hands down, his best album, with Pieces of a Man being second. Well, for those who don't really want to hear the ins and outs and why I feel this way about this album, and they just want the verdict, Do or Die 2 by AZ is a solid release, a worthy successor to the original, but not as good as you would think. Let me explain. So this album that we've waited for a little while, right, is about 13 tracks, right? About 43 minutes in length, my kind of album for sure. And has a couple of features, right? Like Idris Elba does the intro on here, which sort of reminds you of Jay-Z's American Gangster. You know, having, because I believe Idris Elba did the intro on there. So it was kind of dope to hear that. Jaheim's on here. You already know how I feel about that record. We could do without it, but whatever. We'll get into it. Rick Ross. Lil Wayne is on here, Conway the Machine, Dave East, and T-Pain appears on Opponent's track. Now, there's some other people on here, and they're not necessarily listed, but this is probably, I don't want to say great, but this is the thing I didn't like. Let's get into the didn't like. Okay, let's not do that, right? I said it was solid. Let's be positive first, and then we get into what I consider to be the negatives. I think production wise, this is one of Jay-Z's. This is one of AZ's better albums. AZ in recent years, to me, his music has suffered from lackluster production. Now, I don't feel like the production overall knocks it out the park, but the players, like the producers, like Pete Rock and Pink, and cats like that, the ones you know of, right? The producers you know, I think they do a good job with what they give him to rhyme off of. But I always felt like with the recent releases from AZ, the beats never matched his flow because AZ doesn't switch his style at all. What you know of AZ, style-wise, flow-wise, that's what he does. That's what he doesn't do anything different. So to me, he can't rhyme over everything because it doesn't sound good over everything. And in his more recent albums, in recent years, I should say, I just felt like the production could be better. Songs like Sugar Hill work because they perfectly fit AZ's style, his voice, you know what I'm saying, his charisma on a track. And I feel like there are songs on here where that is achieved. I was listening to this album, right? And on my first listen, and I know I didn't say this in the beginning, so I'll say it right now. My first listen is impressions. My second listen is to listen intently, right? The lyrics, the concepts, and all of that. And third listen is to just vibe with it and see if I like it, or it's more of a confirmation of whether I like it or don't like it, right? And I feel like with AZ, I was like, yo, I think AZ would be dope if Rick Ross, dope today, don't get it twisted, if Rick Ross was the executive producer. You know what I'm saying? Because the type of beats that Rick Ross chooses for his albums, AZ would sound dope over every track. That Justice League sound. So maybe a Justice League produced AZ album would be pretty dope. Even the records that Currency rap, the beats that Currency raps over, AZ would sound crazy over those. We don't get too many of those moments. Some beats are better than others. Some are just blah. To me, and when I say blah, I don't mean they're the wackest beats ever. I mean, for a sequel to Do or Die, for what I believe is AZ's last album, I believe he said something like that. This man is highly regarded in the hip hop game, and the production should be better. He should be produced way better than he is. But again, with this album, there are a lot of records I like, and there are some I don't like. If I had to summarize what I thought of this album, let me just say, for one, I think the features work for the most part, right? The song Ritual with Conway the Machine and Lil Wayne is dope. The song Blow That Ish with Dave East, to me, is dope. The song Never Enough with Rick Ross, to me, is dope. But there are a lot of times where I like the beat, I like the way AZ's rhyming, but there's a lot of singing on this album. And that can be a gift and a curse, but there was a lot of singing on this album. And it kind of made me feel like, is he just trying to make a sequel to Do or Die that mostly feels like Sugar Hill? You know what I'm saying? Like he rap and then somebody sing and boom, it's a hit. Because it doesn't really come across that way on every track. Again, it's not a deal breaker, but it just seems to be like, a problem, basically. You know what I'm saying? So, and that was on my first listen. My second listen, I listened intently, and I was like, you know what, this is not as bad as I initially thought, right? Because I think what AZ has to say is what you need to pay attention to. And after a while, the singing on some of the hooks doesn't bother me as much. The Jaheim one, I don't think I'll ever get over that. I feel like it's not just Jaheim singing. The lyrics to that hook, whoever wrote the lyrics to that hook, it's just not good. It sounds cheesy to me. And maybe it would sound better if somebody else was singing it. But it just lacked the oomph, of what you would want from a record like that. From an album like this, it's just kind of what you would. It's just not what you would want. It doesn't capture, and it was the first single, so it doesn't capture what Sugar Hill was for Do or Die. Now, those who may be wondering, no, Nas does not appear on this album. He doesn't. And as a fan of the two as a duo, I'm kind of upset at that. Because if you go listen to Do or Die 1, Nas is like, I think he's rapping on 2 records, but then talking on another one. Like, he's all over the album. And I don't feel like Nas being on the AZ album would have overshadowed it. I just don't believe so. I believe it would have enhanced it in a lot of ways. But overall, I feel like for 13 songs, for 43 minutes, the guest appearances are mostly on point. The beats are mostly on point. The rhymes are exactly what you come to expect from AZ. I feel like this is a really good album. I feel like those gripes I have are minor, right? And subjective, right? They're just the way I felt. But I found myself listening to this album over and over and over again, beyond those 3 listens. And I wouldn't put it in my top 5 of the year, but I might. Because there's something about this album that's just chill and cool. You know what I'm saying? And it's AZ. And it's the fact that the beats aren't blowing me away, but maybe they're just right for this moment. Again, some of the singing and the lackluster hooks I could do without. But at the same time, I feel like I'm not skipping anything. I might skip that Jaheim one. I ain't even gonna front. I might skip that. And it seems like the people like it a lot. Recently, it was posted that, and I believe this is after the first week, that AZ's Do or Die was charted at number 2 on the top 40 hip-hop billboards. Only person in front of him was Drake. The person in the 3rd position was Kanye West. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing for AZ, who hasn't been in the spotlight like that probably since the Firm days, right? As far as hip-hop goes. Give AZ his flowers. This album a lot of people seem to like this album. I need to see more interviews with AZ. I see interviews for whack albums all the time, and they on everybody couch, they in everybody radio station, they on everybody magazine. If this is a sequel to a very dope album from back in 1995, from one of the legends of the hip-hop game, or one of the greatest verses of all time on Life's a Bitch, and this is his final album, and people feel the way they feel about it, to the point where it charts on the top 40 at number 2 behind Drake only, give that man his flowers. So, AZ Do or Die 2, if you are an AZ fan, you probably like it. If you're not an AZ fan, you'll probably like it. That's going to do it for me for this review. Obviously, there's more reviews coming as we start to close in on the end of the year, where we'll be talking about what's my top 5. But it's a little ways to go, but that's where we headed. Please know that this podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Doesn't matter if it's your iPhone, Stitcher Radio, Pocket Cast. Just look for Hip Hop Now Podcast, subscribe, and stay locked in to weekly hip hop content. Until then, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.
Drop it on the random.